What if I told you that a simple sheet of aluminum, costing less than a family dinner, could cool a home without electricity? It sounds unbelievable. But in the scorching summer of 1938, one rancher accidentally discovered something that modern homeowners have almost forgotten. What happened next could completely change the way you think about cooling forever. In the summer of 1938, a rancher named Elias Bowers nailed a single sheet of polished aluminum to the south slope of his adobe roof outside Tucson, Arizona. That sheet cost him $1.80 at the local hardware store. By the end of that August, while his neighbors were sleeping on their porches to escape the 108er heat inside their homes, Elias was sleeping under a wool blanket. His bedroom, measured by a traveling agricultural agent from the University of Arizona, held steady at 60 Fahrenheit. No fan, no electricity, no moving parts. Just a piece of metal angled at exactly the right pitch, catching what the sky gives away for free every single night. Today, that same sheet of aluminum costs about $22 at any hardware store in America. And the reason you have never heard of what Elias Bowers did, the reason your utility company would rather you install a $4,000 heat pump instead, is the same reason the Department of Energy quietly stopped funding research into passive radiative cooling between 1979 and 2014. Somebody was making money off your discomfort, and they still are. What Elias stumbled into by accident, physicists now call sky cooling or passive radiative cooling. The principle is almost embarrassingly simple. Every object on Earth radiates heat as infrared light. Most of that heat gets absorbed by the atmosphere and bounced back down, but there's a specific window in the infrared spectrum between 8 and 13 micrometers, where the atmosphere is transparent. Heat that leaves a surface in that wavelength range does not stop. It does not bounce back. It travels straight through the sky and dumps into the cold vacuum of outer space, which sits at about 455 degrees Fahrenheit. If you can build a surface that emits strongly in that window while reflecting sunlight, you have essentially connected your roof to the coldest heat sink in the known universe for free forever. NASA has known this since the Apollo program. Their thermal engineers use the exact same principle to keep instruments cool on the lunar surface where the sun hits harder than anywhere on Earth. A 1975 technical memorandum, NASA TMX 3311, describes selective radiators achieving surface temperatures 36 degrees below ambient air temperature in direct sunlight. Read that again. Colder than the surrounding air in the sun with no power input. That memorandum sat in a filing cabinet for 4 decades, while American homeowners spent an estimated $29 billion a year on air conditioning. The villain in this story is not one company, it is a coalition. Carrier Corporation, founded by Willis Carrier in 1915, built its empire on the premise that cooling required compression, refrigerant, and a monthly electric bill. General Electric and Westinghouse followed. By 1955, the residential air conditioning market was expanding at Music 19% per year, and the entire economic engine of suburban America, from tract housing to power plant construction, was being built around the assumption that every home needed a mechanical cooling system consuming between 3 and 5 kilowatts. Passive cooling was not just inconvenient to that business model. It was existential competition. So the research funding dried up. The USDA Farmers Bulletin number 1772, titled Farmhouse Planning for Hot Climates, originally published in 1936, and containing detailed diagrams of reflective roof assemblies and radiative cooling ponds, was quietly pulled from circulation in 1952 and never reprinted. I checked the National Agricultural Library still has one water-damaged copy in their archive. You can request it, but they will not scan it. Meanwhile, in the desert Southwest, in pockets of Amish and Mennonite country in Ohio and Pennsylvania, in old ranch houses in New Mexico built before the war, the knowledge survived. Not because these people were geniuses, but because they were stubborn, and because they were not on the grid, and because when your nearest neighbor is 4 miles away and the power line stops at the county road, you learn to work with what the sky gives you. A man named Jonas Yoder, farming outside Millersburg, Ohio, showed a visiting engineer from Penn State in 2011 how his grandfather had built the summer sleeping porch on the north side of the barn. The roof was corrugated galvanized steel, unpainted, angled at 32 degrees with a 2 in air gap between the metal and the plank ceiling below. On a July night, with the outside air at 17 to 9 degrees, the interior of that sleeping porch measured 61. His grandfather built it in 1934. It has never been repaired. Jonas said, and this is paraphrased from a thread I found on an off-grid forum, that his grandfather used to laugh at the English neighbors running their window units. He said they were paying to push heat out of their houses when the sky was ready to take it for free if you would only ask it politely with the right angle of metal. Here is what nobody explains clearly. Aluminum is not magic. What matters is emissivity. In the right infrared band combined with reflectivity in the solar band, polished bare aluminum reflects about 92% of incoming sunlight. That part keeps heat out, but polished aluminum has low emissivity, meaning it does not radiate heat well on its own. The trick, the thing the old builders knew and modern engineers rediscovered around 2014 at Stanford under a researcher named Aswath Raman, is that you need to coat or texture the aluminum so that its underside, or the surface facing the interior, radiates strongly in the 8 to 13 micrometer window. In the 1930s, they did this by pairing the reflective aluminum sheet with a whitewashed lime plaster ceiling directly below it. Lime plaster, it turns out, has an emissivity of around 94% in exactly the right infrared band. The aluminum reflected the sun. The lime plaster, sheltered from direct sunlight by the aluminum, radiated the accumulated heat of the house up through the aluminum and out into space. The whole assembly cost in 1938 dollars less than $4 per $100 square feet of roof. Now you might be thinking, this sounds too simple. If it worked, everyone would do it. That objection is exactly what the industry wants you to feel. Because the truth is, it does work, and the reason everyone does not do it is that nobody sells it to you. There's no commission on a $22 sheet of aluminum, there's no financing package, there's no annual service contract. There is no refrigerant to refill every 7 years. Your HVAC contractor cannot put his kids through college by installing a piece of metal and a can of lime wash. If you have made it this far, you already understand, more than 99% of homeowners, about how the old builders actually cooled their homes without touching the grid. And if you want the full blueprint, every measurement, every material specification, every angle calculation for your specific latitude, every wiring diagram for the optional 12-volt fan assist, every workaround for humid climates, and every loophole in modern building codes that lets you install this legally on almost any existing roof, it is all in the manual. Link in the description below. The manual also includes the reprinted diagrams from that 1936 USDA bulletin I mentioned, the ones the National Agricultural Library will not scan for you. Let us talk about the objections, because I know they are coming. Humidity. This is the first thing anyone from the Southeast asks. Does passive radiative cooling cause condensation problems in humid climates? The answer is yes if you install it wrong, and no if you install it right. The condensation issue comes from cooling a surface below the dew point of the interior air. In a properly designed assembly, the cold surface, which is the underside of the aluminum, sits inside a ventilated air gap that is open to the outside at the eaves and ridge. Moisture that condenses drains outward and evaporates. The interior ceiling never gets below dew point because the lime plaster or gypsum acts as a thermal buffer. Ranchers in Louisiana have been using this exact assembly since before the Civil War. There's a plantation house outside Natchitoches built in 1841 that still has its original reflective tin and lime plaster ceiling. Interior humidity readings taken in July of 2019 by a preservation team from Tulane averaged 52%, while outside humidity was 91%. No mold, no rot, no mechanical dehumidification. Second objection. Does this work in my climate? The honest answer is that passive radiative cooling works best in dry climates with clear night skies, but it works measurably everywhere in the continental United States. The performance degrades with cloud cover because clouds absorb and re-emit that infrared window, so the sky effectively becomes warmer. In Arizona and New Mexico, you can expect surface temperatures 15 to 20 degrees below ambient. In humid Florida, you might get 8 to 10 degrees below ambient on a clear night, 4 to 6 on a cloudy one. But even 4 degrees applied continuously across an entire roof surface translates into a house that stays measurably cooler and an air conditioning system that runs about 30 to 40% less often. A retired mechanical engineer, music, named David Kellner posted on an off-grid subreddit last year that after retrofitting his Georgia farmhouse with a reflective aluminum roof deck and a ventilated attic assembly following pre-war specifications, his summer electric bill dropped from $340 in August of 2022 to $112 in August of 2023. Same house, same thermostat setting, same family inside. Third objection, does it really cost that little? Yes and no. The raw materials. For a 1,000 square foot roof retrofit, come in under $600 if you buy standard corrugated aluminum roofing at current prices, which as of last month were running about 58 cents per square foot at farm supply stores. Add lime wash for the interior ceiling, another $40. Add furring strips to create the air gap, about $90. Add ridge and E-vents if you do not already have them, about $120. Total materials, roughly $850 for a full retrofit of an average roof. Labor is where it gets expensive if you hire it out. A contractor will charge $3,000 to $5,000 for the same job. If you do it yourself over 2 weekends with a helper, you're looking at that $850 figure plus a case of good beer. The point is, this is not a myth about a $22 solution to a $4,000 problem. The $22 figure is one sheet of aluminum which is what Elias Bowers started with in 1938. On a small section of roof, scaling it to a full house is more expensive, but still an order of magnitude cheaper than a central air conditioning system that will need replacement in 15 years anyway. Fourth objection, how long does it last? Aluminum roofing installed in the 1940s in Arizona is still in service today, more than 80 years later. The oxidation layer that forms on bare aluminum actually improves its emissivity over time in the relevant infrared band, meaning the roof gets slightly better at radiative cooling as it ages. Compare that to a residential air conditioning compressor, which the Department of Energy estimates has an average service life of 12 to 15 years, or a heat pump at 10 to 15 years, both requiring refrigerant top-ups, coil cleanings, and eventual replacement of the entire unit. Over a 50-year period, a family running conventional cooling will spend somewhere between $18,000 and $35,000 on cooling equipment, refrigerant, repairs, and elevated electric bills. The passive assembly in the same 50 years might need one repainting of the interior lime wash and a screw replacement here and there. The specific technical parameters that actually matter, music, and that nobody bothers to publish in a clear format are these. Roof angles should be between 25 degrees from horizontal for latitudes between 25 degrees or north, which covers almost all of the continental United States. The reflective surface must face upward, meaning the polished or mill-finished side of the aluminum goes toward the sky. The air gap between the aluminum and the structural roof deck below should be a minimum of 1 and 1/2 in, music, ideally 2 in, and must be ventilated at both ends. The interior ceiling material with high infrared emissivity can be traditional lime plaster, modern gypsum board with a flat white paint using a matte acrylic binder, or a cellulose-based ceiling tile. The ceiling should sit within 12 in of the underside of the aluminum reflector for optimal radiative coupling. Music, though performance is still measurable at up to 24 in of separation. The physics behind the effect, if you want to understand why it works and not just that it works, comes down to something called the Stefan-Boltzmann law and the atmospheric transmission window. Every object radiates energy proportional to the fourth power of its absolute temperature. A ceiling at 75 degree F, or about 297 K, radiates approximately 450 joules per square meter across all infrared wavelengths. Most of that radiation gets absorbed by water vapor and carbon dioxide in the lower atmosphere and re-radiated back. But in that 8 to 13 micrometer window, the atmosphere is nearly transparent and radiation escapes to the cold sink of space. A well-designed passive cooling assembly can dump between 60 and 100 W per square meter of net cooling power to the sky 24 hours a day, though the effect is strongest at night when there is no competing solar gain. Multiply that by a 1,000 square feet of roof, and you are removing between 5 and 9 kilowatt of heat per day from your house for free. That is roughly equivalent to running a 1-ton air conditioner for 6 to 8 hours daily, which is exactly what most southern homes require in July. There is a moment I want you to picture. It is not from 1938 or from an Amish farm in Ohio. It is from a Habitat for Humanity build in Sedona, Arizona in September of 2021, which I read about in a small local news piece that got maybe 400 views online. A volunteer crew led by a retired physics teacher named Marjorie Chan built a 3-bedroom home for a family of 5, using a modified pre-war reflective roof assembly. Total additional cost above standard construction, $400. The family, whose electric bill in their previous rental had averaged $280 a month during summer, reported an August bill in their new house of $31. $31, not because they were sitting in a hothouse being frugal. The interior of that house sat at 70 F during a stretch of 106 days. The children slept in their own rooms without fans, and the entire mechanism was a piece of angled aluminum, an air gap, and a white plastered ceiling. Nothing else. No compressor, no refrigerant, no monthly service call from a technician in a branded van. Elias Bowers died in 1971. His ranch outside Tucson was sold to a developer in 1988. They tore down the adobe house to build a subdivision of stucco tract homes, each with a 3-ton central air conditioning unit rated at 15 SEER, each consuming between 4,000 and 6,000 kilowatt a year, each family paying between $2,000 and $3,000 85 degrees. Elias slept under a wool blanket in August, and his descendants, if any of them still live in that neighborhood, are paying a utility company for the privilege of being uncomfortable. The knowledge did not disappear. It was pushed aside. The USDA bulletin was pulled from circulation. The NASA memoranda were filed and forgotten. The old ranchers died, and their sons moved to town. A homeowner who installed a central air unit in 1978 has by now replaced it 3 times at an inflation-adjusted cost of somewhere north of $40,000 and paid perhaps another $60,000 in electricity to run those units, $100,000 minimum for a service the sky was offering free the whole time. There is a house in Davis, California, built in 1979 by an architect named Jonathan Hammond that has been continuously occupied and continuously monitored ever since. Hammond, working with a small firm called Living Systems, designed the house around 3 principles: a white roof to reflect daytime solar gain, a radiant cooling panel on the north-facing slope to dump heat at night, and a rock bed thermal mass under the floor to store the cool for daytime release. The house has no air conditioner. It has never had an air conditioner. In the summer of 2006, when Davis experienced a heat wave that killed 147 people across Northern California and pushed daytime temperatures above 110 degrees for 11 consecutive days, the interior of the Hammond house never rose above 78. The utility bill for that month was $14, all of it lighting and refrigerator. Hammond published the performance data. It was reviewed by the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. It was filed. It was forgotten. When Hammond died in 2018, his obituary in the Davis Enterprise mentioned his advocacy for bicycle infrastructure and made no reference to the house that had been quietly outperforming every high-efficiency HVAC system in the county for 4 decades. Why? Ask yourself who would have profited from making Jonathan Hammond famous. Not Pacific Gas and Electric, which sells the kilowatt hours a conventional home consumes. Not Carrier or Trane or Lennox, which sell the compressors. Not the mortgage industry, which underwrites homes based on comparable sales. And there are no comparables for a house without an HVAC system. Not the building code officials, whose entire framework assumes mechanical conditioning and who would need to rewrite thousands of pages of regulation to accommodate a passive standard. Not even the environmental nonprofits, most of which are funded directly or indirectly by foundations whose endowments include utility stocks and industrial holdings. The silence around radiative cooling is not a conspiracy in the sense of a room full of men in dark suits plotting suppression. It is something more mundane and more powerful. It is the absence of a constituency. Nobody makes money from you not needing something. And yet, the physics keeps working. In 2014, a team at Stanford led by Shanhu Fan published a paper in Nature titled Passive Radiative Cooling Below Ambient Air Temperature Under Direct Sunlight. They had engineered a multi-layer photonic film that could radiate heat through the atmospheric window while simultaneously reflecting virtually all incoming solar radiation. Their prototype cooled a surface to nearly 5 degrees C below ambient at solar noon in full sun in California in July. The paper made headlines for about a week. A startup called Sky Cool Systems was founded to commercialize the technology. As of 2024, SkyCool is installing panels on commercial buildings and grocery store refrigeration systems with documented energy savings between 15 and 40%. The panels work. The physics is real. The commercial rollout has been quiet, targeted at industrial customers, and largely invisible to homeowners. Why? Because the residential market is locked up in that $130 billion replacement cycle, and nobody in a position to sell to homeowners has an incentive to disrupt it. But you are not waiting for a startup. You do not need a photonic multi-layer film. Shanhu Fan's team got to 5 degrees below ambient in direct sunlight. Plain mill finish aluminum angled correctly gets you 4 to 6 degrees below ambient at night, which is when you need the cooling anyway, because that is when your thermal mass, your slab, your masonry, your interior walls absorbs the cool and holds it for the following day. The Stanford version is impressive engineering. The aluminum version is impressive economics. And the aluminum version has been available at every hardware store in North America since roughly Music 1952, when Reynolds Metals began mass marketing rolled aluminum sheet to the residential construction market. Reynolds, incidentally, ran advertisements in Life magazine in 1953 and 1954, explicitly promoting aluminum roofing for its cooling properties. The ads showed a farmhouse in Georgia with a shiny aluminum roof and a caption that read, "In part, the sun bounces off, the heat radiates away, and your family sleeps cool." Those ads ran for about 18 months. Then, in late 1955, Reynolds shifted its residential marketing toward aluminum siding and aluminum windows, and the cooling messaging disappeared. The reason, according to internal Reynolds marketing memoranda later obtained by researchers at the Hagley Museum in Delaware, was pressure from the newly formed National Association of Home Builders, which had partnered with the electrical utilities and the air conditioning manufacturers on a joint promotional campaign called Live Better Electrically. That campaign, running from 1956 through the late 1960s, spent, in inflation-adjusted terms, over $2 billion promoting all-electric homes, including central air conditioning as the American standard. Reynolds, dependent on the home building industry for its siding sales, quietly stopped talking about roofs that cooled themselves. That is how knowledge dies in a market economy. not through censorship, through the reallocation of advertising budgets, through the slow starvation of any message that does not serve someone's quarterly revenue. A generation of homeowners who might have grown up with the intuitive understanding that a shiny roof cools a house grew up instead watching commercials for General Electric central air units. And by the time they were buying their own homes in the 1970s and 80s, the idea that a roof could do anything other than shed rain had been thoroughly erased from the popular imagination. You can restore it in your own house this weekend. $22, one sheet. Start on the north slope of your roof if you have one, or on a small section of your attic ceiling accessible from below, or even if you rent and cannot modify the structure as an angled panel above a window facing away from the equator. The rules are simple, and they have not changed since Dunkel published his tables. The metal must have line of sight to the sky. It must be angled to maximize its view of the coldest part of the sky, which is the zenith and the region around it. It must be thermally coupled to whatever mass you want to cool, either through direct contact, through a small fan moving air across its underside, or through a water loop if you are ambitious. And it must be thermally isolated from the daytime sun during summer, which usually means a simple shade or a seasonal cover. Though on the North Slope in most of North America, this is not necessary. Do that. Measure the results with a $15 infrared thermometer, and you will join a very small club of people who have personally verified that the universe has been offering free cooling to anyone who bothered to ask. The club used to be much larger. It included Navajo weavers and Persian architects and Roman engineers and Georgia farmers and a handful of USDA researchers and a Stanford physicist and an architect in Davis who died without fanfare. It can include you. All it costs is a sheet of metal, an afternoon of your time, and the willingness to believe that the people selling you comfort might not have been telling you the whole truth about where comfort comes from.